Frogging in the slop. It is one of the most fun ways to catch a bass during the summer. Whether you fish ponds, lakes, rivers, there's a lot of slop, there's a lot of cheese mats growing this time of the year. Today, I want to discuss that. So stay tuned, it's gonna be a good one. This video is brought to you by sportsmansoutfitters.com. You know, when we get to go fishing, we like to be out there as long as possible. And you should always pack some drinks and some snacks. And I love to put them in a Bruin cooler. Let's face it, boat coolers aren't the best, and I really like a cold drink when it is super hot out. And right now, this soft cooler, which is one of my favorites, is on sale for just $99 at sportsmansoutfitters.com. So if you guys are interested in a cooler like this, click the link down below in the description. Now, probably the most important thing that guys don't think about when it comes to fishing a scum mat is the speed at which you fish your frog. This is something that I have found to be extremely important, because a lot of times I think guys go out there and they get in the mindset of all kind of just doing the exact same thing. They're gonna go out there and they're gonna cast that bait and they're just kind of twitch it and reel it across the mat. Now, what I have seen is that to be on the opposite side of the spectrum sometimes really can help you to get bites. For instance, bringing that bait really fast across that mat from time to time can actually cause a reaction strike from a bass that is under it. And then there are other times where being extremely slow, really just creeping that thing across that scum, is going to get you way more bites. Now, to figure this out, it really just comes down to experimentation. What I suggest to do is that over the course of a day or a period of time that you're fishing a mat, cast that bait out and work it several different ways within a cast. So work it pretty fast and then work it really slow and then kind of do your normal pace. And you might start to pick up that every time you stop that bait is when you get bit, or every time you're working it really fast is when you get bit. So once you know that, then you can just start applying that. Then you can start working that bait either faster or slower. Now, speaking of fishing a frog over this scum mat, I just want you to know that not all frogs are created equal. When I am specifically fishing this type of matted vegetation, I will actually kind of make a scum mat frog. And what I mean by that is I'm actually going to take a frog, I'm going to cut the legs off of the frog, and I'm going to add a little bit of weight to the inside of that frog. Now, what that does is it gives the bass a smaller target to actually hit. That way, if they blow up through that mat, they don't just grab the legs, they grab your bait. And the other thing is that that extra weight is going to help you to make a really long cast across the mat. And it also actually creates a little bit of a V-wake as you're bringing that frog across the mat. And that really helps a bass to just hone in on that bait. Now, I understand that buying a frog for $10 and cutting the legs off is not ideal. So this is not something that you absolutely have to do, but I have seen situations where this does make a big difference. Now, I typically use a pointed nose frog when I'm fishing in the scum mats. One of my favorite frogs to do this is just the Spro Bronzeye 65. There's a lot of great frogs that you can do this. That's just the one that I pick up more times than not. Now, with that being said, I've actually run into several situations before in places like Lake Champlain or Lake Gunnersville where I will have bass that are blowing up through a mat and hitting my frog, but they keep missing it. No matter what modifications that I make to that bait, they keep missing the bait. And something that I have started to do to help me to catch more of those fish is actually throw the Spro Poppin' Frog. If you look at the Poppin' Frog, it's a lot more slender of a bait. And I tend to just have a really good hookup ratio with this particular bait. So even though having a cupped mouth may not be perfect for fishing it over scum, I have a really good hookup ratio with this bait. So if you are missing a lot of fish and you don't want to make all the modifications to your frog, I would highly suggest picking up the Spro Poppin' Frog. Now, with that being said, there are just going to be times where you miss fish while fishing this way because it's kind of just in the nature of the beast. As a bass is coming up through a mat, they are opening their mouth and they are literally just eating everything. You know, they can't just specifically pick out a frog, they're gonna eat plants, they're gonna eat that scum, they're gonna eat everything. There's a lot of things that are in the way of a hook, or a bass may not like having all that stuff in its mouth, and so therefore you are going to miss some fish, and it's just kind of the nature of the beast. Now, something that I love to do is keep a Texas rig close by, because sometimes if you're missing a lot of fish and you can't fix that, you can actually pitch a Texas rig back into where that fish blew up and catch that fish. So always have a Texas rig on hand and ready to go. Probably the best thing about fishing slop, fishing these scum mats, is that you don't need any type of fancy electronics to do so. This is something that you can visibly see with your own eyes. So whether you're a bank fisherman and you don't have any electronics, or maybe you own a boat and you just don't have great electronics on it, this is something that happens throughout the summer. This is a pattern that you can get on through the summer where you do not need your electronics to do so. You literally just have to look out and see the slop itself. A lot of fisheries where you do have a lot of these slop and scum mats, they might be completely covered. They might be across the whole lake. They might be everywhere you go. So one of the key things is learning how to navigate that slop, learning how to navigate that scum to try to find the fish that are in it. Now, I want to give you a really big time perspective when it comes to fishing the scum and the slop, is that if you fish lakes that have a lot of this type of cover, you may go hours at a time without getting bites. But typically you do find bigger schools of bass that are actually under a mat or in a certain area. So although you may go an hour or 2 hours without getting a bite, once you do get a bite, it's really, really important to put the brakes down and really cover that area effectively, because what I have seen time and time again when fishing slop is that you will have these schools under them. So when you get bit, make sure you cover that area very well, because you might catch a lot of fish in a very small area. Now, a huge thing that I always look for when I am fishing slop is a pattern within a pattern, right? The main pattern is that you're fishing scum, you're fishing slop, but to find a pattern within a pattern can really help you to just eliminate a lot of that water. So what I mean by that is you might find that, hey, the bass are in the scum, but they're only on points in the scum. So then you can just go around and fish all the points, and that's where you catch a bass. Something that I see a lot when it comes to these scum and slop mats is that anywhere where you have shade lines within that scum mat is going to be where the bass are. To me, this really just goes to show you how much the fish like being in the shade, because if they are underneath of a mat, they are already in the shade. So if you add on an actual shade line from a tree or a dock on top of that, it is really dark in those areas. But a lot of times I have found that in those really dark areas, the darkest area that you can find, that is where the bass is going to be. So a lot of times, although I'm targeting the scum, I will still run around and look for shade, whether that's shade under a dock or shade that is created by an overhanging tree. That is something that can really help you eliminate a ton of water. Now, another huge thing that I look for when it comes to fishing these scum mats is water depth close by. A lot of times you're going to have these mats that are literally on the shallowest flats. I mean, they might be a half a foot of water, a foot of water. But if you can find those scum mats that are closer to a little bit deeper water, and when I'm talking deeper water, I'm talking about like 3, 4, 5 foot of water, those tend to be the areas where the bass can live. They might go up into some of those really shallow mats to feed, but the ones that they live in tend to be closer to a little bit deeper water. And deep water is going to be, again, relative to the lake or pond or river that you are fishing. It might be 3 foot somewhere, or it might be 6 foot somewhere. But I've always found that if you have a little bit of depth close to a scum mat, that tends to be a very consistent scum mat, one that you can come up to multiple times a day or over the course of a summer and catch fish on it, because it has that depth close by. Now, real quick, I just want to go over the rod and reel equipment that I like to use for fishing a frog. Now, one of my favorite frog rods to use is the Arc Tharp Series Moneymaker rod. This is a 7 foot 3 inch medium heavy rod. Now, I like to fish with this rod when I'm fishing the frog around more open water situations and kind of lighter scum. If it's not real heavy vegetation, this is still one of my favorite rods. Now, I'm gonna pair that up with 50-pound braided line and a 7.3-to-1 gear ratio reel. This is the Bruin ELS reel. Now, if I go to places like Lake Gunnersville where you could catch a 7 or 8 pounder, that is actually when I'm gonna step it up to a 7-foot 6-inch rod. But actually, I still like a medium heavy power rod in this situation. I really don't like to use a heavy action rod when I'm using straight braided line, because personally I set the hook really hard, and if I'm using a heavy power rod with braided line, I tend to lose a lot of fish because of the way that I set the hook. So I still like a medium heavy. It still has plenty of power to get that fish out of the slop, but it's not too much where I'm gonna rip big holes in that fish and lose a lot of fish. Now when I step up to that 7.6, I still use the same reel and the same 50-pound braided line. So frogging in the slop, I keep it simple. It's one of the funnest things to do. Now if you like to frog in open water and you miss and lose a lot of fish, I actually made a full video that I'm going to link right here that really goes into detail on the modifications that you can make to a frog that can help you to lose less and miss less. So watch this video. If you enjoyed this one, comment below, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.